Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Lunatics Radio Hour podcast. I am Abby Brinker, sitting here with Alan Kudan.
Hello.
And today we are picking up our conversation around space horror and really getting into, I would say, one of the most iconic, not even just space horror, but film franchises of all time. And of course, I'm talking about Alien. But let's take a step back. So
Why? I love Alien.
I know.
I'm stopping you. We got to talk about Alien.
Okay, I just want to...
It's so good.
I agree. And I'm going to let you have tons of airtime in this episode. There's one thing I want to say.
You make it quick.
Which is that last episode, we went through all the sources, which are going to be in the description of this podcast as well, so you can see the sources that we've used for the research that is being presented today. But also, we spent a lot of time last episode categorizing different space horror films, right? So the first category are aliens on Earth, or extraterrestrial things on Earth in a sort of calm way here to communicate with us. The second category was similar but different in that it was alien invasion. And then we got into space horror, truly, like horror set in space with 2001: A Space Odyssey. So now it is time to talk about one of the most iconic space horror, but film franchises, horror franchises of all time, Alien.
Okay, take it away, Abby.
Alien was released in 1979. The film was directed by Ridley Scott and stars Sigourney Weaver as Ripley. Alien is such an excellent example of space horror for many reasons, but one of them being that it exemplifies so many different elements of the subgenre. So I'm going to kind of break it down that way. For instance, one of the things that is, I think, most terrifying organically about space is this idea and fear of isolation.
Well, you can't breathe in space. That's a fact.
Sure, and that's part of it, right? There's danger everywhere. There's unknown everywhere. It's kind of like ocean horror in that way, deep sea horror. But also there's this, again, fear of isolation and helplessness in this great expanse, this great void.
Isn't it interesting that in this great expanse and void,
yeah,
the number one horror mechanic in space horror is claustrophobia?
Yeah, 1,000%. Because of what you're talking about, right? Like, not being able to breathe, but also in a lot of this horror, it's on small ships with tight corridors and people die and you're alone and, and it's just so ripe with things that could go wrong.
If you panic and open a window, you're dead.
Isolation in space horror shows up in so many other films, but a few examples: Event Horizon from 1997, Sunshine from 2007, The Cloverfield Paradox from 2018, Moon from 2009, The Martian from 2015, Gravity from 2013, and of course, 2001: A Space Odyssey from 1968. What's really cool about science fiction and space horror, in my opinion, is that often the creators will take a really basic human emotion or fear, again, like desolation, abandonment, isolation, something that many people can relate to, and transpose that fear onto a situation that we likely are totally unfamiliar with, like being on a space station or another planet. But because we have an inherent fear of isolation, right, or claustrophobia or whatever it is, we have an inherent appreciation for the total vastness of space, and we have this inherent appreciation for the total vastness of space and the unknown. Suddenly that isolation feels totally all-consuming and horrifying and relatable.
Gosh, if I had a nickel for every time I felt desolated. You really lumped some movies in there that are quite different. But
don't you think they all explore the themes of isolation?
The theme of isolation, yes.
That's the sentence that I said.
Yes, but that's, yeah,
sure. Here we go. Pick it apart, Alan.
But that's any movie on a spaceship where shit goes wrong.
Okay. Floor is yours.
Let him cook. Man, are we talking about Alien or are we talking about these other movies? You got to keep me on the rails here.
Now we're talking about Alien, but if there's anything you want to say about those movies, now's the time.
Okay, the other movies.
Yeah.
Whew. Let's start with Sunshine.
Okay.
It's such a big film when you think about it. Just the idea of the sun is going out. There's an expedition that is sending a nuclear payload into the sun to restart the fusion process. Humanity has sent one previous expedition and they lost track with it. And they've since scrapped together Earth's very last resources to send one final one. In this case, you don't have just the well-being of the crew, which of course is paramount because they're the protagonists, but if this fails, Earth will die. And it's going to be like a very slow nuclear winter type death because, they'll just freeze, which is really like horrific. I love that movie. I also love Cillian Murphy, one of my favorite actors of all time. I wish he did more stuff outside of like losing him for like 30 years to Peaky Blinders. Just put him in more horror. He's so freaking good.
He's so good. He really is.
And
He's so great.
what a handsome guy.
Yeah, he's pretty hot. I also do want to talk briefly about The Martian because we actually ended up explaining the plot of The Martian to your mom recently for, I would say, a good 40 minutes.
I mean, that's being generous. It took a lot longer.
You were trying to make a point about potatoes, and somehow we ended up talking about The Martian.
She just didn't understand the concept that you could take a piece of a potato
And grow more potatoes.
and plant it and grow more potatoes.
And so she didn't believe me when I talked about it, like scientifically, about how people actually grow potatoes. So Alan was like, you know what? You know what's going to convince her and break through? Talking about The Martian.
She loves Matt Damon, another handsome guy. This seems like a slam dunk. This was a perfect example of space horror through kind of like a comedic lens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because this is all about the tone of the writing.
Right.
I've seen the movie, but I love the book more. In the book, it's all these like little micro chapters because it's just the journal of Mark Watney, and it's all
What's
about.
that called, Alan?
That's an epistolary novel.
Very good.
And it is. I learned that from you because you're so smart. And it's just about the domineering spirit of man. But on the flip side, this could have 100% just been a horror novel, right? Of this man venting his fears and insecurities as he slowly succumbs to death. And that's what The Martian is. But he's slowly succumbing to death, but instead he's dealing it with like an upbeat can-do attitude of like, well, how do I live through the next 3 days? Maybe I'll do this. Okay, cool. We got through 3 days. Now how do I live through the next, 600? Yeah, let's try this instead.
Well, I'll say the tone of it, too, and it's not really horror, but the tone of The Martian is sort of what makes it so charming and stand out. The story itself isn't revolutionary, and I love that. I love that it takes what you expect from these situations, and instead of giving you like some kind of like cheeky, tongue-in-cheek character who's a badass or whatever, it gives you kind of like a goofy guy,
I want to give, a round of applause to Andy Weir, the author of The Martian, and honestly all of his works, because he basically takes a character, puts them into these impossible situations, and then just removes the fear and replaces it with science.
Right.
So the other huge Andy Weir novel is Project Hail Mary.
Oh, I've never heard of that.
Oh, it's so good. I'm not going to say a thing about the novel because everyone should just read it.
Okay.
It's so good. But another doomsday scenario, and the character deals with these mind-shattering scenarios with science, where it's like, well, I don't have no idea what to do in the situation, but 1 + 1 still equals 2. So, let's see what we can do with math.
Speaking of Matt Damon, do you think Interstellar is space horror?
We talked about this during part 1 of the series. Space horror is a very gray area with science fiction. And Interstellar, no, I wouldn't classify that as horror, but there's certainly horrific elements.
I agree. But there's moments in that movie where you're understanding, not to use a pun, but the gravity of what's happening in the situation. Like, to me, black holes, like, there's nothing more horrifying, and
Than a black hole.
Yeah.
Really? Why?
It's just such an unconquerable enemy.
Why an enemy? It's a force of nature.
Right. But if you are in a
Do you
situation.
say a tsunami is an enemy?
Yeah. The natural disaster, like a tsunami is also like a thing, like a black hole is like minding its own business. It's never going to be the case unless the whole of Earth is sucked into a black hole in my lifetime that I'm going to have to deal with it or think about it. But if you think about what a black hole is, to me, it's sort of like what cosmic horror is based on, right? It's this very like basic concept of this portal, this vortex of destruction that is slow and unstoppable and sucks anything into its path into it, and there's no way out, and you get spaghettified, right, if you go close to it. And it's impossible. It's an impossibility to avoid if you're in its way. It will always win.
I mean, yeah. Is there any definitive black hole horror movies?
Well, there are a few that come up. One is High Life, starring Robert Pattinson, and then Event Horizon. A few things called Black Hole, but I can't vouch for those movies.
Well, Event Horizon is unofficial Warhammer 40K lore.
Is it?
Yes.
That's interesting.
In Event Horizon, they use a black hole, effectively, to travel, to breach dimensions. And that dimension being the warp. There's Warhammer 40K people that understand this better, but they effectively breach into another dimension, and that dimension is hell, or the hell equivalent.
Sure.
And so these like demon forces start, because equivalent exchange, right? We're sending energy into that dimension, so energy has to come into ours. All this demonic energy, mind warping stuff, physical entities is taking manifest in our dimension because of physics and shit.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Have you heard recordings of the sounds of a black hole?
No.
I think if you had heard that, you would also associate them as the wildest, most scary enemy.
It would make sense that it's loud.
Do you understand?
Okay, how much? What organization had an intern that was willing to go to a black hole with a microphone to record that?
NASA.
That's crazy.
They didn't go to the black hole. They picked up on the sound waves coming from space. You're a sound engineer. You understand this.
There's no sound in space.
What? Of course there is.
What? How? Sound is the vibration of molecules.
There's molecules in space.
Not enough to touch each other.
Yeah.
No, sure. There's a certain amount of hydrogen atoms, but they're not close enough to interact with each other. There is no sound in space.
Are you talking about this, like, the word space as in, like, distance?
What? No. Space is a vacuum.
I'm talking about outer space.
Outer space is a vacuum.
There's sound in outer space.
If you clap your hands in space, you could not hear it.
So all the space horror movies where people are talking, that's people go to space, they don't talk on space stations?
They're talking
I know that they do. I've heard recordings of the astronauts.
Inside space stations, they have atmosphere. Sound travels through air, right? There's no air in space.
There's sound in space.
There is no sound in space.
How did they get this recording then?
So, a few different ways. One is that they either used...
NASA released new audio approximating the sound of a black hole at the center of the Perseus galaxy cluster. Experts discovered it had a pitch of over, quote, million billion times deeper than the limits of human hearing, making it too deep to be heard.
The bottom threshold of human hearing is 20 hertz.
So this was a million billion times deeper.
A million billion. When you think of like whales, right? They sound kind of goofy.
Yeah.
But that's because you're only hearing a very small fraction of what they're actually saying.
Their whole range.
The vast majority of it is subharmonics.
Can they approximate that? Because that would be cool to hear.
Well, sure. But then all they do is they pitch shift it up into the threshold of human hearing.
What do you think about the movie Gravity?
I've only seen it once. I think Sandra Bullock is incredible.
Yeah.
I think she was best in Miss Congeniality.
Sure.
But Gravity is very good. It's a very good film. It really encapsulates the helplessness of being a Earth-originating simian-like being and then being thrust into a zero-gravity environment that has to breathe through a suit.
Right.
You know, like we were never supposed to be in space, yet here we are.
I also think it takes a really strong actor to be able to carry a movie like that when you're alone for the majority of the film, and she does a really good job. My one complaint is the amount of like little grunts she makes, but that was, that wasn't her choice. Anyway, Alan, let's talk about Alien.
Whose choice was it?
The directors, I assume.
Sandra, I want you to grunt.
Another common space horror element that we see in Alien is an enemy. In this case, the ultimate predator, the xenomorph. The xenomorph is an apex predator, impossibly strong and intelligent, and throughout the franchise, the audience becomes experts on the life cycle of this creature, from eggs to facehugger to chestburster, and finally, the adult xenomorph. An adult xenomorph has a spiny exoskeleton body that acts as armor and makes it, again, incredibly strong and impenetrable. It's outfitted with acid blood and a secondary inner jaw that allows it to bite through a human skull.
That's his little mouth.
For me, the xenomorph in all of its phases triggers an instinctual fear. I may not often encounter aliens, but I do encounter horrible bugs and other earthly creatures that are unpleasant, and this is obviously drawing on those fears, right? The xenomorph was designed by H.R. Geiger. Geiger was a Swiss surrealist artist. He was known for what the internet calls a dark biomechanical aesthetic. His work has influenced many different elements of horror and science fiction aesthetics. The filmmakers knew how important the design of the xenomorph was to the movie. Producer Walter Hill even said that the success of the movie depended on the creature design. Quoting from the artnet.com article by Tim Brinkoff, quote, "The xenomorph has become so iconic that it is difficult to imagine it looking any different from what we ended up seeing on screen. That said, Scott's team actually cycled through a number of designs before settling on the final version. One of the first iterations, designed by American-Australian artist Ron Cobb, who previously worked on Star Wars Episode IV: A New Hope from 1977, apparently resembled a massive four-legged crab. Dissatisfied with this design, Scott turned to a different artist, named H.R. Geiger. Born in Switzerland, Geiger was known for his paintings of demonic biomechanical creatures, drawn in a style so unique that it was given rise to the term Geiger-esque. When Scott stumbled across the artist's Necronomicon, a 1977 coffee table compendium of his greatest work, the director was so impressed that he decided to bring him onto the project, end quote. And if you do look up Geiger's Necronom 4 artwork, the piece that directly inspired the design of the xenomorph, you see how truly similar it is. Even though Geiger was a 2D artist, he took on the task of translating his designs and his art into the 3D creature. Famously, he used condoms for the creature's lips and put a real human skull into the head to perfect the anatomy of his design. The Artnet.com article makes a great point about Geiger's lack of recognition for his work on Alien. He did win an Academy Award for visual effects, but every single expansion of the franchise takes his work and uses it or iterates on it freely. The xenomorph is the ultimate predator in terms of look, strength, skills, and tools. A horrifying, unrelenting, and visceral enemy. Some would say similar to a black hole.
So the xenomorph is one of my favorite horror movie villains, simply because they're so freaking cool. The xenomorph that we're all familiar with from the H.R. Geiger drawings, which if you look up are incredibly sexual.
Very phallic.
I mean, not just that. It's like they're phallic, but they're also effeminate. Like it's just a very sleek. It oozes power, and like, but that's the point. And so you learn later on in the alien mythos, these are engineered beings. This is not just some like alien species,
right?
That is invading, right? It's not that at all,
right?
This is the absolute pinnacle of genetic engineering to make the ultimate killing machine. One of the things that helps with hunting is having this like sexual sleekness. It's just like this extra layer of disarmament, of superiority, Is
that my interpretation is almost like it's just like a stripped down being, right? It's not a being that has shame around any of these things. And it just is in its nature, right? It is a being that reproduces a certain way. It is a being that hunts a certain way, and it just doesn't have any pretense about that.
I think you said the perfect word. Like it's all the being is all about reproduction. It's its sole purpose is reproduction.
Right.
Which I mean is true about most organisms everywhere.
Sure.
But this is the encapsulation of the idea. And when you have an artist behind it, of course, they're going to kind of go hand in hand. I also love how the xenomorph changes the appearance based off the seed species. for Alien 1 and 2, we see the same type of xenomorph.
Right.
And that's because it is for lack of a better term, it's a xenomorph egg that, becomes the little face hugger thing and then latches onto a human. And then we see the full developed xenomorph based off gestating inside of a human. It's in the later series, 3 and onwards, when we see the full swath of xenomorphs. They kind of like pick and choose different bits of genetic code based off what is the most superior bit of the seed organism.
Right.
In Alien 3, it infects a Doberman. And then you get this quadruped xenomorph that's super fast, super strong, and becomes the ultimate thing. And it based off of what, a fucking dog? You'd think a human would be a superior hunter, but all of the intelligence comes from the xenomorph.
Right.
But it just takes certain physical attributes from the dog. It's kind of cool.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. So another, and you hinted at this earlier, Alan, but another major theme in space horror, as demonstrated by Alien, is claustrophobia. So we see it in Alien and in the whole franchise, but we also see it in found footage space horror movie Apollo 18 from 2011, Event Horizon, The Last Day on Mars from 2013, 400 Days from 2015, and The Silent Sea from 2021. In addition to other horror elements that push Alien over the edge from pure science fiction to space horror, like extreme body horror for one, Alien also plays with feminism in a huge way. Not only is Ripley one of the most iconic female action heroes of all time, the movie plays with gender in a few fascinating different ways. Ripley was originally written as a male character. The original script featured a 6-person all-male crew. The Ripley character was originally called Martin Robbie. Ripley is strong, mentally and physically. She's crafty and resourceful and brave. And beyond that, her character breaks with traditional gender stereotypes in a delightful way. She wants to follow quarantine protocol instead of bringing Kane back on board after infection, right? She's cool, she's logical, she's intellectual.
Oh, a woman that wants to follow the rules, huh?
There are also some feminist reads that the xenomorph queen is a symbol of feminism in the franchise. I'm quoting from the Public Books article by Eleanor Johnson, quote, "In an incredible moment of interspecies communication, the alien mother looks at Ripley, sees that she too is trying to protect her child, and so the alien mother signals to her daughters to back off, and she lets Ripley pass. There's a flickering moment of interspecies recognition when the alien mother decides that she will not attack and dismember these two human females. Instead, she will let them go. Nobody wants their babies to die."
I would argue that most, if not all, xenomorphs are female. They reproduce, they proliferate, and they need some exterior genetic material to make that so.
Yes, absolutely. I believe that is the case. Picking up the quote again. "For a flickering moment, the monster becomes human, but the film cannot tolerate that level of radicalism. As soon as she and Newt are almost out, Ripley sees an egg opening, and she decides to torch the entire nest. The film thus scuttles the possibility of interspecies understanding. The mother alien becomes a horrifying predator again, and for the rest of the film." And then skipping ahead a little bit here.
We're talking about aliens, by the way.
Yes. Skipping ahead a little bit here. And this may be the Alien movie's signature move, to model how patriarchal culture distracts people from capitalism's parasitism by designating women, whether witches, prostitutes, midwives, priestesses, political activists, those who want to terminate pregnancies, or protective mothers, as the real threat to the status quo, end quote. Alien was so successful that it inspired 5 main sequels and or prequels and spin-offs. But more so, Alien was one of the most successful space horror and science fiction movies ever made. Not only did it bring this genre to way more people than had previously experienced it, it also influenced so many movies since its initial release. With a budget of $11 million, it went on to make $184 million globally. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $700 million in 2025 money. It's one of the highest grossing films of 1979, proving that sci-fi horror could be a blockbuster genre. Alien currently holds a 98% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Roger Ebert called it, quote, "one of the scariest movies ever made," end quote. Aliens was released in 1986. It also stars Sigourney Weaver, along with Carrie Henn and Bill Paxton. Aliens was directed by none other than James Cameron. And Alan, tell us about the rest of the Alien franchise, please.
Oh, geez. Here we go. So the original Alien was indeed a pinnacle of science fiction films in general, but it's a really small story. It's Ripley on a ship. They investigate LV-426, and they encounter some eggs, and they bring it back, and it's bad. All these things, right? But it's all about Ripley on the ship. Well, with the rest of the crew for a very limited amount of time. But it's a very self-contained story of Ripley surviving on a ship against a single alien. It's a small, contained environment, rife with horror, and it kind of wrote the book on how to do horror movie villains well. You don't show the villain. You let the audience interpret what you think they look like. You show them absolutely, it's like Jaws, you know? You show it absolutely minimally, only when you have to, and you let fear do the rest of the work. Also, Ripley, besides just, being a final girl, was a perfect example of you're smart. You don't do all the dumb shit that everyone else is doing in these slasher movies.
Ripley is like the perfect final girl. I just want to say that.
She makes great decisions. She's up against impossible odds. This isn't Michael Myers, who walks really slow and, maybe pops out of the closet and you can beat by poking a clothes hanger in his eye. This is a xenomorph that is mostly bulletproof. You can't even use blades on him because you'll burn to death from his acid blood. You have to be insanely smart. And Ripley really wrote the book on how to be a smart woman protagonist. And it was really cool. Then you move on to Aliens, so in Alien, the xenomorph had all the weapons and Ripley had nothing. In Aliens, the humans have all the guns, right? And the aliens have whatever, right? And it's kind of a slaughter on the humans' side. And it's more of an action movie. They transitioned perfectly from a horror movie to a sci-fi action movie. And that is one of the reasons why the franchise really kicked off, was because they went immediately for a broader audience.
Why? What do you think is the difference in tone that makes alien horror and Aliens shift into action sci-fi?
In the first one, Ripley was helpless. Did she even have a flamethrower in the first one? I don't remember. But it's her versus one alien with no guns. She had nothing. Everything she had was improvised. And then in Aliens, she comes with a team of Marines, and she is the consultant. And she said, okay, if you're going to fight the xenomorphs, this is what you need. All these fucking guns. Everything that you think you need, double it. And they actually listened. It's a action movie, but also when they get there, the stakes that everyone prepared for were tripled. So they were still kind of overwhelmed. And, they do okay, but it is an action movie. And it's just the greatest battle at the end with Ripley and the fucking mech fighting the xenomorph queen, with her cargo loader, punching it into the airlock. It's so cool.
What about the other films in the franchise? I mean, I have personally seen Alien Romulus, but I know we're not there yet. I know there's some...
We're not there yet.
There's some films
Next
before.
comes Alien 3.
Okay.
And then that is Ripley on a penal colony. And that is kind of like... In the first one, the xenomorph had the advantage. In the second one, the human had the advantage. In the third one, everyone has the advantage, but it's kind of dumb.
Okay.
It's a cool idea. They crash land on a penal colony. There's a lot that goes on. This was supposed to be the end of the franchise.
We love a good trilogy.
Yep. But money talks, right?
Sure.
And the franchise makes too much money. Enter Alien 4 Resurrection. Guess what? Ripley's back. So mild spoiler for Alien 3. Fast forward 30 seconds if you want to listen to this. But at the end of Alien 3, she is infected by a xenomorph. So she is going to, chest burst out.
Right.
Instead, she commits suicide. She jumps into a giant vat of molten steel.
Like Terminator.
Just like Terminator. But they resurrect her with DNA. And after many, many failed attempts, they resurrect her and the xenomorph inside her.
Oh.
Because they're trying to bring the xenomorph back because it's all about biological warfare. So now...
Is she in every movie? Is Sigourney Weaver in all of the movies?
No.
Oh.
So, yeah, she comes back. They extract the xenomorph from her through surgery. She also is like part xenomorph because it was like a cloning thing.
Okay.
It's kind of weird.
Sure.
She's not a human that was infected with xenomorph. She was a human that was bred with xenomorph DNA. So she's kind of like, superpowers.
Hybrid, yeah.
Yeah, she's got superpowers. It's a bad movie, but it's really fun. You should all watch it.
Okay.
But it's bad. After Alien Resurrection, which was the equivalent of Halloween H2O.
Okay, yep.
Not
Halloween Resurrection.
No, Halloween H2O.
Okay.
It's cool. It's really cool, but it kind of jumps the shark.
Sure.
Then you move into the next era of the franchise, which is Prometheus.
I saw Prometheus in theaters.
Prometheus is a horrible movie the first time you watch it.
I agree. I was like, am I an idiot?
You're not an idiot. You're only an idiot because you didn't watch the 2-hour YouTube explanation of what you're actually watching.
Right.
Now, had you watched some guy on YouTube tell you everything that's going on, everything about the engineers and whatnot and what everything means and everything, I watched Prometheus. I thought it was boring as hell. It made no sense. And then I watched my YouTube explanation, which was longer than the Prometheus movie. And then I went back and rewatched Prometheus. I'm like, wow. The perfect film. You
know what, though? There's art that I will work for, but blockbuster movies, not art that I'm going to work for. You gotta bring me along on the ride.
I'll give them this. After I watched the Mythos, I'm like, you know what? Fuck yeah, I'm on board.
Why does it make you think it's the perfect movie?
It's not the perfect movie, but it's a very cool amount of world building.
Sure. Because I've heard this before from bros. A lot of bros say Prometheus is the perfect movie. And I'm like, even in a perfect world where this movie is accessible, why is it perfect?
Nothing about this movie is accessible. You have to access it on your own.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that for a movie that plays in a major theater, in an AMC.
Yep.
I mean, okay, so then what happens after Prometheus?
After Prometheus...
But Prometheus is a prequel.
Prometheus is a prequel.
Yeah.
And then we move on to Covenant. In Covenant, it's just more cool alien shenanigans. We have the absolute coolest droid played by Michael Fassbender.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, he's just so cool. I'm sorry, like Michael Fassbender, he's a fantastic actor.
Yeah.
He makes a wonderful Magneto, and he makes an even better robot. Mm-hmm. You put them together.
Whoa.
Yeah, wow. I want to see that. But no, it's so encapsulating. Alien Covenant is not a great movie on its own. It's not even good. But as part of a greater whole, it's a pinnacle piece because it really expands certain aspects of the franchise. And you really learn these things once you keep moving forward. And I hate having to say that you need to see the entire thing to appreciate it because that really doesn't make for a good film.
Right.
But when you watch all these things back to back, you're like, this makes so much sense.
Sure.
But the fact that these things come out like 7 years apart, you're like, go fuck yourself.
Right.
But then after that comes Romulus.
And I can jump in here.
Okay.
Romulus stars Rain. That's her name. And it's excellent. I knew very little at the time when I saw Romulus. I had seen Alien a long time ago and Prometheus, and that was it. And I thought it stood alone. And I know some diehard fans thought it was horrible and laughed out loud at it, but I thought it was a fun film. I have no major issues with Romulus.
It's super fun. Anytime you have a droid that is kind of an anti-hero, I'm on board. It's interesting.
I also like that the main dynamics in Romulus are friendship and like siblings, and not everything is romantic. I thought that was kind of refreshing and cool.
I think that is a cornerstone of the Alien franchise, though.
Interesting.
Is that you have relationships with women that have nothing to do with romance.
Feminism strikes again.
which for some crazy reason is unique to the Alien franchise. I want to say that one of the best told stories in the Alien franchise is actually from one of their video games called Alien Isolation.
Okay.
And you play as Eleanor Ripley's daughter. This actually takes place between Alien and Aliens when Ripley is technically in stasis in between planets because she takes Jonesy the cat, into her little pod and she goes to sleep. There's like 50 years that go by and she has a daughter. And after like 10 years or so, the daughter becomes old enough that's like, I'm going to go find my mom. And she starts finding all the clues to like what the fuck happened to the Stromo. And then she ends up going to this space station and there's a bunch of bad shit.
Isn't that when Romulus takes place too?
Romulus Romulus also takes place during the same time period.
Yeah.
And fun fact about Romulus is that you can actually see Ripley's ship moored in
cool.
in the background of one of the shots.
That's cool.
So like, they're not looking for Ripley. They don't know anything about it.
Right.
But she's there.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, her daughter is like clearly looking for her mother, but having to deal with rogue droids, xenomorphs, all these things. But she has like all the strength of her mother because, same genes.
Yep.
Mixed with, it's a video game. So like the stakes are so much higher.
Cool. That's very fun.
And in the game, the xenomorph is immortal.
Mm.
You cannot kill the xenomorph. It's kind of cool.
We'll take a bow, Alan. Thank you for your Alien recap.
You're welcome.
And if we're talking about Alien, we should also mention a film that influenced it. A film called It, The Terror from Beyond Space from 1958.
Not Stephen King's It.
No. It, The Terror from Beyond Space. The film was directed by Edward L. Kahn and written by Jerome Bixby. It tells the story of the second time a spacecraft from Earth is able to make it to Mars. The second expedition is looking to investigate what happened to the first crew, which they discovered crashed into the planet. They find only one survivor on board. But there are similarities between It, The Terror from Beyond Space, and Alien, in the form of an alien stalking and terrorizing humans. But that wasn't the only film that influenced Alien. Quoting from the New York Times article by Mikado Murphy, quote, "Even with its high-tech visual effects and intricate sets, Alien is fundamentally a horror movie about crew members getting picked off one by one." Mr. Scott said that when he first read the Alien script by Dan O'Bannon, quote, "It was frankly what I would call a very well-written B movie, and we carried it out in an A way with a terrific cast and a fantastic monster. Those B-movie undertones were what emerged in the low-budget Alien knockoffs that came after, like Galaxy of Terror from 1981, and perhaps best known for a sexual assault committed by a giant worm.
We watched Galaxy of Terror. Holy fuck.
And Dark Universe from 1993, which features Joe Estevez and a poorly made monster," end quote. I do not think that I watched Galaxy of Terror.
You did. You were right next to me. Galaxy of Terror, I really don't know what to say about this movie. It seemingly checks every box that I want in a movie, while simultaneously satisfying none. It's a psychological horror sci-fi fantasy where everyone's like greatest fears are coming to life. Like that was a really, really weird, disturbing movie that was overly graphic. I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. Also, the effects were bad while simultaneously incredibly graphic. I can't explain it.
Okay, we two thumbs down over here.
I know, but like two thumbs really up that plummet down. I don't know.
It's okay. You're getting emotional.
I don't want to talk about it.
In general, the 1990s saw an influx in space horror movies, including Event Horizon again from 97, Sphere from 98, Species from 95, and of course Jason X from 2001.
Have you seen Species?
Nope.
Do you know the premise?
Tell us the premise of Species, Alan.
The premise is that a species wants to mate, so they become a sexy thing and seduce.
Yikes.
And it's a long-running franchise.
Understood. Obviously, these run the spectrum between silly and serious, and I wonder if this can partially be explained by a growing interest in science fiction and also the advancements in CGI and other special effects that allowed for space horror movies to be produced in better quality. This is also something that came up a bit in our AI series, that certain filmmakers were literally waiting for effects to be good enough to make scripts that they already had. Quoting again from the New York Times article by Murphy, quote, "The horror in space premise has also been executed with more creativity and bigger budgets. There was Event Horizon, in which the crew, including Lawrence Fishburne, was tormented by hallucinations, and Doom, with Dwayne Johnson from 2005, in which the crew was done in by mutated Martians. Mars and Attacks also factored this year into Life, in which crew members like Ryan Reynolds were taken down by an organism they found on the Red Planet, and the horror space concept converged in a more outrageous way in Jason X, the 2001 entry in the Friday the 13th franchise that sent the film's killer title into space along with androids," end quote.
I'm so glad you brought up Doom because it's a very unique...
Doom, not Dune.
Doom. Yes.
Doom.
Doom.
I'm just saying it for the audience. Doom.
Due to scientific experiments into extra-dimensional travel, they open a rift on Mars into another dimension. And once again, just like Event Horizon, the rift they open is into hell, which, is pretty bad. And then one guy says, uh-oh, I got to take care of this. And then he just cocks his shotgun and goes to town. And that is the entire premise of Doom, of one guy fucking up all of hell.
Dang, that's pretty rock and roll.
It's pretty cool.
Another concept that I love, which I was first pointed to in Murphy's New York Times article, is the space heroine final girl. Obviously, Ripley is the most iconic example of this, but she isn't the only one. Quoting one more time from Murphy's words, quote, "Horror films thrive on the concept of the final girl, the last one left standing to fend off the maniacal killer. But Sigourney Weaver as Ripley in the Alien films made the transition from survivor to full-blown sci-fi action hero. She paved the way for other leading women in space, from Jodie Foster in Contact to Sandra Bullock in Gravity. Within the Alien universe, Noomi Rapace took the heroic reins in Prometheus, and Catherine Waterston flexes her muscles in Alien Covenant. One of her alien battles bears a striking resemblance to a Ripley encounter," end quote.
I mean, they took from the best. You're never going to beat Ripley.
I feel like Ripley has like Sarah Connor vibes.
She 100% has Sarah Connor vibes. Well, Sarah Connor is insane. She's insane in all the right ways.
Sure.
But she is insane.
Sure.
Where her paranoia is off the charts, and because of that, she prepares her son, for who knows what might come.
Right.
In this case, Ripley has everything right in front of her, but no one believes her. So she's left to kind of like deal with this on her own.
Right.
Not too dissimilar from Sarah Connor, but, she kind of makes more of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, fair enough. And I do want to take a moment. I know this is controversial for Contact. I know it's not pure horror, but it remains one of my favorite films of all time. And for me, there's like real heart in Contact, right? It's a love story. It's a story about family. It's a father and a daughter. It's a story about grief and loss. But it's also a story about a woman working in a man's fields. And it is terrifying on that level alone, but on other
women
levels.
Working in men's fields is horrifying.
But there's these moments, like, for example, when Jodie Foster is walking into this machine where the situation is so unnerving because, A, people don't want her to be there so much that they're blowing the shit up, or they don't want it to happen in general. They don't want her to be the one to do it. They pick someone else first, even though she deserved it. And then she finally gets this moment of this thing that she's been fighting for and deserves. But what it is this machine that's so unknown. And there's just something about the situation of that's so, she's so brave, right? And whatever. But the movie sort of takes these turns, right? It starts as kind of this wholesome drama movie about like a father and a daughter. And then it takes another turn where we realize, okay, she's a scientist and she's dealing with all these satellites, but then boom, there's Contact, right?
That's so interesting that you say that because, we've seen so many movies where the man just goes against all the rules and does, what he thinks is right. And it's corny.
Yeah.
But then when the woman does it, you're like, wow. She's so brave.
Well, because she doesn't have that liberty generally, right?
I'm not I'm not criticizing this.
Yeah.
It's like I'm
You're pointing out the difference in the reception of those actions.
also it's more of just like a difference in the writing.
Yeah.
You know, generally when someone is writing the man doing it, it's from like an action movie. When it's a horror movie, it's the woman. Isn't
Sure.
that crazy?
Sure. The second turn I think Contact makes is when the machine is actually built and we see it for the first time. I don't know about you, but the imagery of that moment, again, when I saw this movie, however old I was, right? I was quite young.
4.
The imagery, though, of that machine, like, will stick with you forever. It is so alienoid and bizarre and impressive that it's kind of like this movie started off with a guy and his daughter and a ham radio, and like here we are under this like billionaire's waterfall, right? Like it really has some strange twists and turns in it. And then of course, right when she goes on her journey, it's a whole nother thing. But I just wanted to talk about it because it holds a dear place in my heart, and I think again, really the cool thing about space horror is that so much of it can be situational in a way that science fiction isn't, right? Star Wars is not horror. It's science fiction. It's action, but it's not really horror. It has dark moments, but even dark moments when you have Darth Vader or other things, compared to like the impending vacuum of a black hole, it seems light and silly, right? It's not horror. So it's been cool as an exercise to try to parse out the difference between those things. And again, it's a very thin line and it really doesn't truly matter at the scheme of things, but it's been a fun kind of thought exercise. Okay, Alan, this is your final moment. What space horror films did we miss?
Well, I mean, as we talked about in the very beginning of the episode, it's like such a broad genre that there's so much stuff we haven't talked about. But the main thing that jumps to mind that we have not discussed is Dead Space, which there are some films, but it started as a video game franchise. And the premise of Dead Space is that humanity, far into the distant future, space travel has become a thing where we're traveling to distant galaxies. And in all this time, humanity has never encountered another species. As far as humans know, they are the only ones in the universe, which is already kind of a unique concept.
It's kind of scary, even if you think of it that way.
But then, all of a sudden, they discover the marker, which is a giant...
Crayola.
a giant alien artifact.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yeah.
Weird.
What do you mean artifact? Like a rune?
Giant fucking monolith looking thing.
Okay, like a stone sculpture. Why are alien artifacts always look like ruins from Indiana Jones?
It doesn't at all. Actually, it's all twisty, like kind of like a horn.
What is the substance that it's made of?
Tower. I don't know. I didn't test it.
But what does it look like?
It looks
Stone?
like a giant spirally tower of horn.
Like ivory?
Black with like red stripes.
Okay.
And then this thing, once it was touched by organic material, activates. And then everything that is dead reanimates. So, but in a way that it's like, that's how it reproduces, through necrotic material. So this species exists by reproducing through other species dying.
That's pretty rock and roll.
So these things are called necromorphs. All they want to do is kill other things because that's how they reproduce.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty fucked up.
Yeah.
Like it completely wipes out a space station, all the people, all the inhabitants become these like weird warp necromorph things. One of the most terrifying things are the babies, because all of a sudden you have these like weird baby looking murderous things. And it's an entire franchise so full of lore, and it's so horrific. Also, they're mostly immortal because, you know, they're dead. The only way to actually kill them is to completely dismember them so they can't move anymore.
Fascinating. I'm surprised you haven't talked at length about Helldivers on this series.
What would that have to do with space horror?
Isn't Helldivers in space? Are we
No.
going to different planets?
No, it has very much to do with space, but that's all about space democracy.
I think it's pretty scary. You're constantly under attack.
You are, but you're spreading democracy to these
So you're a colonizer.
These socialist swines.
I understand. Anyway, on that note, that brings us to the end of our history exploration of space horror. But the good news is that the ride is not over yet. We have 2 space horror story episodes because we got so many incredible submissions from writers. So we have 2 upcoming episodes featuring those really great stories for you guys. And I'm really thrilled to be able to share them because, again, they're very impressive and scary and great. And we got some awesome voice actors paired with those. So I'm super, super excited about that. In the meantime, I hope everybody's hanging in, doing okay. Stay safe, stay spooky, and watch out for black holes. Bye.
Bye.
Looking for even more creepy content? Consider joining our Patreon for way more content just like this, including bonus episodes and very special deep dives. You can also join us on Discord if you want to stay involved in the conversation, and find our video content on YouTube, TikTok, or Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, anywhere you like to get your social updates. And of course, head to lunaticsproject.com where you'll find our very, very spooky merch and links to everything you need to know.
Are you upset by our egregious fabrication of facts? Tell us about it on Discord.